All right, so we're coming to you live with another World Citizen Talk, and I'm Vibro, uh, a fellow World Citizen. A little bit about myself, really quick. I came across Gary's video last summer, and I really think that it was life-changing to the effect that I started researching world citizenship, researching Gary, uh, learning up some, learning on some material that he had, buying some of his books, and I just think that this is a very important aspect of life and a transitional period for all of humanity. So I've pretty much have tried to dedicate a good portion of what I've learned in the real world, and made this YouTube channel to share my walk, so to speak, as a world citizen, and try to focus specifically on the person of the world citizen and the cultivating factors therein. And I'm happy to say that this is frequently asked questions number 2 with David Gallup, the WSA president, World Service Authority president, and I'm hoping that we go and have very many more chats. But World Citizen, it means a very first step in the direction of union and camaraderie and peace and evolution, as you know, what we should have always been as a united species, as one species. And I look forward to sharing that with everyone and getting more feedback as world citizenship becomes more and more in the forefront and in the limelight. And now I'm going to give it to you, David, if you don't mind. Introduce yourself to the viewers and talk a little bit about world citizenship and your role there at the World Government of World Citizens, please.
Hi, yes, I'm David Gallup. I'm the President and General Counsel of World Service Authority. I've been here for about 22 years now. I came originally as World Service Authority's Chief Attorney and then became President a few years later. And so now my role is much more administrative, managerial, sort of like an executive director of an organization. And so it's to oversee that every aspect of the organization is functioning in the way we'd like to see it function, to help as many people around the world that we can. Our goal on a day-to-day basis is not only to educate about human rights and implement human rights, but also help individuals along the way, which is unusual. Many human rights organizations, their focus is really mostly on reporting of human rights violations rather than on individual cases, where we actually do a little bit of both, and certainly wanting to help individuals to understand who they are in this 21st century, and that is that we are all world citizens by birth and in fact. And one of the main functions of World Service Authority is to register individuals around the world as world citizens and to help them to see themselves first and foremost as part of and an integral part of the one human family that we have. And so world citizen is both something that is an individual, but also is a representative of humanity as a whole. And humanity may be a word that we bandy about very glibly, but it's really an important word for this organization and for, I would say, the existence of the Earth and humanity into the future, because it's that recognition of how we are all the same, so that if we can get to that, then we can celebrate our differences rather than fighting over them or wasting resources over the differences. So it's that common element of who we are, not just in our DNA, but also in our moral and intellectual understanding of ourselves, our philosophical understanding of ourselves, that makes us unique and special. And we should protect. All life is sacred, so we should be protecting life, not only human life, but other life on the planet too. So that's what in a quick nutshell, one other take on world citizenship. World citizenship can be defined actually in many different ways, and many different people have. We do have a special credo and pledge that is on our World Citizen Registration Form, which you can request by email, by post, or you can, of course, get it from our website, which is www.worldservice, that's one word, .org, worldservice.org. And there's application forms link on the homepage of the website. Well, that's what World Service Authority, as I said, one of the main focuses is world citizenship. And I think today, though, we are going to talk in this conversation about the different aspects of document issuance, getting the world passport, perhaps a little bit about what that represents. So I think today is going to be a more procedural conversation, probably, right, Vibro, rather than philosophical. I mean, there may be still issues that come up in the procedural questions that might be philosophical, but this may be a good show for individuals who want to learn more the how-tos, that is, how to apply, or
Right.
you know, the sort of statistical, perhaps, questions about it also. And so that's what I see the usefulness of this particular episode.
Okay. And as always, it's good to be with you. I'm happy to be doing these FAQs with you.
Yeah,
right,
thank you for being the master ceremony here. I appreciate that. It's very helpful to have another person sort of outside of the framework of the organization, although you are inside in a sense too, because we're all part of this world citizen government actually. But in a sense, you're newer to this than a lot of people who are surrounding me here in the organization, and that's useful to have a new viewpoint, new eyes to what we're trying to do, and ask questions that people who are also new to this would also have. So thank you for helping us with this. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And I also mentioned you're acting as our media coordinator too for the organization, and that's something that's although we've always had PR, public relations, and outreach in some formats, we're beginning to do it in a much more systematic way. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. I'm very happy and proud to be a part of the organization, and I hope to represent world citizenship in the best way that I can. And on to the questions here. They are, as you mentioned, they are based on the World Passport. These are the frequently asked questions that we get a lot from either phone calls, post, or email. And so the first question we have here is, what are the benefits of having a World Passport, and are there any disadvantages or difficulties?
Right. Yes, everyone wants to know before they apply for the passport, and this would even be true for a national passport, what does it mean? What are you getting for it? Is it worthwhile? Do I have to have it? And let me actually answer that. Now I'm getting onto the philosophical before I've even answered the procedural, but I think it's important. No one needs a passport to travel.
Right.
A passport is a document that is a human construct that we have created to control people, to limit people, to, in a sense, prevent people from exercising their rights and to really be free.
Right.
So I guess I'd have to start out with the World Passport is really an anti-passport. The point of the World Passport is that we need to get back to a place where the use or requirement of having to have a passport is no longer needed. I mean, why do I need a piece of paper to like this that looks, where is it? There it is. That looks like a passport, or that is a passport, to go somewhere? Well, I mean, throughout all of human history, you didn't need a passport. You could simply get in a boat and go where you wanted to go. It wasn't really until dramatically after World War II when it became a control device by the nation states, especially the wealthier countries, to limit who could come and go, so that certain countries, certain parts of the world would not become overrun by a whole bunch of other people who wanted a better life. So it really is, the national passport system is a system that has been upheld to really maintain the we versus they mentality of the rich versus the poor, or however you want to define it or divide it. Well, so the reason why we're issuing this World Passport, though, is to say, look, if I carry this document, I am saying that I am free, that it's my rights that I'm claiming. I'm not asking for your permission to go. No, a right is not a grant by states. A right is something that you are born with innately and inalienably. A state can't give you your right to freedom of travel. You have it automatically. When I present this, I'm saying I know that I have these rights, and you, national government, whichever government you are, know that I have these rights too. In fact, you, the national government, have also affirmed these rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Charter, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and over 100 national constitutions affirm the right to freedom of travel, which is the basic right that this world passport is affirming, that we all have that right to freedom of travel, which, if you, in the Declaration, just to restate it for people who've never read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 13 in sections 1 and 2 of that declaration state, everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. That's 13.1, and 13.2 of the Declaration of Human Rights says everyone has the right to leave any country, including one's own, well, it says his, but it should say one's own, and to return to one's country. So when you put those two, the right to leave a country, the right to freedom of movement and residence within a country, and the right to leave a country, that means you have the right to live and work and be free wherever you want to on planet Earth. No one should tell you you can't travel freely on your own planet. So the world passport is an anti-passport. It's to get us to a state where we can be again, where we don't need it, where the only passport is our human body. Our body is our passport. It's what helps us get from one place to another. Since we're not free spirits of just our mind floating in the ether, we're linked, unfortunately, to a body, and we drag that along our whole life, and it hopefully drags us where we want to and need to go. But there's so many people in the world who can't go where they want to and need to actually go, either because they're under threat of persecution or torture or something, and they can't go where they need to go. So that's another reason why we issue this world passport, actually, is because there are a lot of people who are undocumented on this planet, who cannot go where they want to go, who are stuck someplace. And
like refugees in Syria, for example.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Who want a better life. Thank you for bringing that up. True, it's true, Vibro. Who want a better life, who but are stuck, and either because they're stuck in the crossfires of the fighting, or they're just stuck because they can't, for whatever reason, they can't get a national passport, or the government won't allow them to leave and is restricting them one way or another. I mean, the world passport is to stand in a place where there is perhaps no other document for an individual who needs to travel. But there are many people who have national passports, even many Americans, for example, and Europeans who have their own national document, but like to get the world passport. So now I'm getting back into the procedural part of this question for your audience to be aware that like to have the world passport, because in certain parts of the world, your national or ethnic or linguistic group, whatever that might be, could have a negative connotation, could potentially get you harmed or in a worst case scenario, even killed, just because of where you happen to be born. So the world passport removes, because it's neutral, it removes that negative nationalistic or classification system and says, look, I am a human being. I am just like you. I'm like everybody else, and it removes that concern, and that a lot of people like to get that. So if someone's traveling in a part of the world where their particular ethnicity or nationality may be disfavored, well, they might prefer to show their world passport for a safety measure. Actually, that's a big benefit, and why people are getting it now, because of the world that we're living in. Is still, obviously, because humans have made it so, a very dangerous world. We're not living as all world citizens yet, and that's partly an educational issue. We're trying to educate the population of the world, but we're just not there yet. Well, so the passport, that's one big benefit. But the passport also has a benefit for people who don't see themselves strictly as a national citizen, or are traveling for like a news media organization where they're not traveling as a national, so they want to have something else that shows their worldly nature. That's another benefit of the passport. I think the passport could be for some people easier to obtain than a national passport. In some countries, they actually require you to have a sponsor to help you to get the national passport. So if you can't find a sponsor because for whatever reason in your life maybe you didn't have a family, you were orphaned, or who knows what, or you came later there to that country, and so you don't know many people, maybe you can't find an adequate sponsor. So does that mean you can't exercise your right to travel? Well, effectively, on a practical level, it may mean that you don't, but not on a rights level. On a rights level, you always should be able.
And that was the point that I wanted to make also, is, to add my 2 cents.
Please.
Where it says the disadvantages or difficulties. It appears to be that the person doesn't know how to claim their rights. They don't know what it means to be sovereign. They don't know what laws or statutes to use when they're talking to frontier bureaucrats and things of that nature. So I think the education of that aspect of being a human being, I think that's one of the difficulties to add to that point there.
It was a difficulty for people to understand who they are, and
Right.
when they identify themselves to know. Because let me put it this way: some Americans have called our legal department and said, "Oh, I went to the whatever country's embassy," and they said, "Oh, well, you're an American, you don't need a visa." So then they try to go with their world passport without a visa, and they say, "Well, how come I didn't get the visa when I went, or how come I didn't get in the country?" Because when they contacted the embassy, either in person or by phone, they didn't explain that they were using a world passport, not that they were traveling as a national citizen. And so there's a distinction between traveling as a quote-unquote American and traveling as or as a national citizen and traveling as a world passport holder. You have to let the officials know what you're carrying. I mean, that you're possessing the world passport and that it's not a national document. It's a global, a governmental document or a global human rights document. And so as long as they know that, then of course they can make their determination of whether they'll recognize it or not. And then if they don't recognize it, the only reason why a government should ever really not recognize a world passport would be because a person is committing a crime of moral turpitude, like harming somebody. That would be the time when a world passport should be obviously rejected, or the person who's using it should be stopped. Other than that, though, if a person's simply trying to exercise her or his right to go where they want to on their own planet, well, that should always be affirmed, because that's a fundamental right that every single nation state has agreed to recognize, and a fundamental right that even if they hadn't agreed, we have, because we can claim our rights as human beings and determine what they are.
Right, and that's why these talks are so important, is so that way people are educated, and then they can have the confidence and the tools, the knowledge required to exercise their sovereignty.
Exactly.
And the more people are out there using their world passport, before you know it, I mean, the
more power it will have.
Exactly. And really quick, the next question would be, how many years has the world passport been in circulation?
Well, the World Citizen Government was founded in 1953, and there was a speech given on the steps of Ellsworth, Maine. It's called the Ellsworth Declaration. You can find that on World Service Authority's website, which gives the basic founding of the governmental institution. And then a year later, or about a year later, World Service Authority was founded in 1954, and so the first world passports were being issued during that year of 1954. Gary Davis, of course, the founder of the World Service Authority and the person who declared the World Citizen Government after the mandate of almost 1 million people who had registered as world citizens prior to the government being founded. He had passport number 000001, the first world passport. So he was the one who laid the groundwork, you could say, or paved the trail for all future world citizens and world passport holders by saying, this document represents me. It represents my rights. I can claim them. I don't have to ask you for permission to do this, because this is a right. And that's actually a point that I was going to make with regard to the previous question. The world passport is, some people say, well, it's fake, or it's not real, or it's a joke or something. Well, in a sense, the world passport is a joke, but it's a joke on the nation state. And I don't mean to make it seem like it's not valid or legal or legitimate by saying that. Not at all, because it is valid, legal, and a legitimate issued document. But I would also say that the national passport, your European passport or your U.S. passport or Canadian passport or Ghanaian passport or Chinese passport, whatever you have, those passports are unfortunately a joke on you, the individual. Because
yeah, it's exposing it.
What'd you say?
The world passport exposes the passport trick, basically.
Exactly, and there's a whole chapter about that in Gary Davis's book Passport to Freedom, about the national passport swindle, so to speak.
Right.
So the world passport identifies you as who you are. The national passport makes you beholden to that government that may be doing things that you don't like, and that you're not responsible for, but other people might think that you are, just because you happen to carry that government's symbol, which is what that passport represents. And so certainly, you'd rather not have a joke on you. You'd rather be on somebody else, and in this case, on the nation state, which is trying to bend your will to its unjust ways, you could say. But the basic answer to the question was 1954 was when the first set of world passports were issued. Gary Davis made a large number to begin with, and many were given away for free when it was first issued to get them out to the public, because there were so many refugees, not that there aren't any more now, there are, There's probably close to 40 million internal and externally displaced persons or people refugeed in the world. But there were many, of course, also after World War II, and many people felt the need for this document because there was, and I don't remember if we talked in a previous speech, maybe we did in one of these conversations about the Nansen passport, but there was a Nansen passport office, Friedhof Nansen, who won the Nobel Prize for this, actually, Nobel Peace Prize, for having a passport office between World War I and World War II that issued it was called the Nansen, Nansen, passport to individuals who needed it because they had nothing else and were not citizens of a particular country. They were effectively stateless. And so we, in a sense, you could say that the World Passport is a follow-up or a post-cursor rather than a precursor, a post-cursor, if you could call it that, of the Nansen Passport. It's taken that idea of the right to travel for everyone, no matter what your economic, political, social, or other status might be, and say, well, this is a right, you have it, so claim it. And so certainly we still actually do issue a small percentage of freely issued documents to refugees and refugee camps around the world. The majority of people, though, do pay a service issuance fee, and some people actually take umbrage to having to pay a fee for the World Passport. They say, well, I'm a world citizen, why should I have to pay a fee to carry this passport? Well, it's really just a practical issue, unfortunately, that individuals must pay a fee just like they do to actually any government. They have to pay a fee to get the passport. Well, because there are people involved, not just myself, but a whole staff of people involved who issue these documents on a day-to-day basis, and so that's time. There's costs that we have to pay in the current system that we're in, Vibro, not in a barter system perhaps that we'll have soon, I hope, but in the current system where our people are relying upon us to pay them to be able to do certain things, whether it's to produce the passport and get it printed, whether it's to purchase the inks and other things that are needed to produce documents, whatever it may be.
The building, the rent, the electricity, all that, yeah.
All of that has to somehow get paid for somewhere. I wish we could give it all away for free. We don't have an endowment yet by a wealthy donor, but if some wealthy donor is listening to this conversation right now, I would beseech you to contact World Service Authority. Our email is info, I-N-F-O, at worldservice.org, and your funds will be buying, in a sense, the now and the future for the world. Because
Absolutely.
Not only do we, of course, this program is just focused on the passport and its issuance mostly, but in other programs we talk about the important nature of this work that we're trying to do here, not only to promote and educate about human rights, but to outlaw war and to have a world that we all want to live in. So we've talked about that before. I don't want to bring that up again in this conversation, but I just thought I'd mention it briefly, just in case there is some wealthy donor out there who's willing to give us an endowment. If we had an endowment, for example, we might be able to charge a small amount, maybe 50 cents, $1 or something perhaps, for a world passport to the majority of people in the world, and for people who have absolutely no funds, refugees and who aren't in camps but are refugees somehow, or people, what about the so-called 13 million people here in the United States who are undocumented? We could document all of them within a few weeks if we had the proper funding and tools to do so. So really, that's why we do charge issuance and expedite and shipping fees, because we have to produce the documentation. There are services involved that require it.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks for clearing that up. I think that's an important point there.
Sure.
All right. Who can apply for a world passport, and are there any restrictions on who or where people can apply for the world passport?
Yeah, definitely.
Same question.
Well, it doesn't matter, almost doesn't matter, I should say, where you are in the world to apply for the world passport, and almost doesn't matter who you are. I mean, a long time ago, probably back in the 50s, we were able to say, anyone, you just had to be a human being. But as things have changed in the world, become a little bit more violent and harsh and stuff, and certainly not that the world hasn't always been somewhat violent, but also more restrictive, and especially in the past 10 to 20 years because of the events going around the world, both with wars and terrorism. We are required as an organization that just happens to have our principal office in a state within, or in a region within the United States, to comply with certain regulations. So, for example, there are special lists that we review when someone sends an application form or even asks for application forms, that we determine, is this person a so-called specially designated national who might be a terrorist or trafficker of weapons of mass destruction or some kind of outright criminal or whatever, at least according to the national government. So we have to do that. It's our due diligence and our compliance program that requires us to do that, and we do it. So let me put it this way, there are certain people that unfortunately, because of the way they have, I expect, treated somebody else, either have paid in to cause terrorism in the past or whatever, where we would not issue to them. Not that we would want to anyway if they've harmed somebody else, but my point is that we are not actually allowed to, or nor do we issue documents to people who are on those lists, basically. And I also have to say, and I'll make a caveat about this at the end. And there are certain places in the world where we're also barred from helping those people. What do I mean? Well, there's certain countries where the U.S. government, for example, does not have diplomatic relations with them, or very minimal, like Iran or Cuba or North Korea or Sudan or Somalia, and places like this where the government may not be functioning that well, or may not be functioning in the way the U.S. government wants it to function. And so we cannot immediately or directly issue documents to someone, say, in Cuba or Iran without first getting what's called a license. A license is a permission by the government to be able to do so. So, of course, in those cases, we want to help those people. So when we get a case of someone who is hurting or has been hurt or wants to get out of their place where they currently are, or wants to flee or something, and wants to use a world passport to do so, the first thing we have to do is obviously they would submit a request for it. We could not take any fees or anything from them, and we can't really reply other than to say we can seek a license on your behalf and see if we can get it, and then we may be able to help you. Other than that, there's nothing more that we can do to help that person in the meantime, because we cannot provide any service or a good or like a product or anything to anyone without their permission first. So, but we can ask for it, and actually we have gotten a license recently on behalf of an Iranian woman, and we're working to try to get her documents and provide her with free legal advocacy also as a backup. But my point is that in the end, I guess you could say, well, anyone in the world could apply for the world passport. There are just certain, I guess you could say, steps that we must go through, each of those steps, to be able to assist that person properly. So it may mean waiting 6 months, a year, until we can get a specific license for a particular case to help somebody. But in the end, we should be able to get it, unless there's some dramatic reason why that person would be somehow rejected in any case. So yeah, there are some kind of controls on how we're doing things, definitely, which, that would be true pretty much wherever we would set up our office in the world. There's always
it reminds me of that there was a arms and trade embargo or something like that you can't, and Paul Zimmerman, I think, the guy that created this pretty good policy, PGP key that encrypted, they barred him in the early 90s from sending it outside of the U.S. It was a big deal because obviously the U.S. didn't want other countries that were not playing fairly or nicely in the world to have encryption technology that was that good for free. Of course, that's changed, and things may change, but I'm glad that you went in depth in that with that question, or with that reply there. All right. The next question is: do you have to be in the U.S. or the WSA office to apply for a passport? I think you actually answered that.
I sort of did. You don't. Let me just give you a quick rundown, though. You do not have to come to our office. Everything can be done by mail or even email, although I have to say sometimes we prefer them just by post anyway, because if someone mails us a photo, for us to get it into our database and produce the documents is actually probably quicker than if they've emailed it, because then we have to reformat the photograph, and it's not always exactly what we need than if we just scan it on our special high-speed scanners on our own. But so people can email in their forms. They can come to our office. Many people, once or twice a week at least, groups of people come to our office to get documents issued on the same day or the same week. And you don't have to be in the United States. You can be anywhere, like I said, almost anywhere in the world to be able to apply. I would make one statement, and that is that we do charge expedite fees. It's the only way we found to make and this may be a question coming up on your list, I'm not sure, but the only way to make it sort of fair. I mean, because we are a small nonprofit organization with a limited staff, it's not easy for us to expand the staff quickly or contract quickly depending upon demand. I would say we're caught between a rock and a hard place. What I mean is we have enough requests for not only for assistance for issuance of the documents, but for human rights assistance and writing legal briefs for refugees and others, because all the staff does a little bit of everything. We have so many, just enough requests of those that are keeping us dramatically busy. But then we don't have enough requests either that aren't linked to document issuance, that are like donations separately of themselves from individuals, that allow us to hire new staff. So it's like a lot to do, but not enough to warrant, in a sense, being able to pay for additional staff. And that means that this was about 10, 12 years ago where we initiated an expedite process. If an individual sends an application form, it comes into our office, we date stamp it so we know exactly when we got it. We get all the forms together in the proper order and the photos together and everything we need so that everything can be, data entry can be done with this form. But the whole process is like an assembly line. So that is the start of the process, is just the mail department opening up the mail, date stamping it, seeing how the person sent their fees, etc., and verifying all that, sending an email to the individual, because invariably, and this is also what makes the process very slow, almost invariably every single application form has some kind of issue with it. Either the person forgot to sign or certify the form, they forgot their photo, they forgot to pay the fee, or they didn't know how to pay the fee, or they spelled something strange in a strange way that we wouldn't normally see, and we want to know, well, is that really how it's supposed to be spelled because that's the word spelled in your community, or was it that you just spelled it a different way and we want to use the standard spelling? So, or maybe they'll put their birth date incorrectly. Anyway, there's a lot of questions, and so all of this is done in the assembly line fashion, and it can take, right now we're running about two months or so, which is actually quicker than it has been even in the last six to 8 months. It was closer to 3 months. So we're down now closer to 2 months, but don't take my word for that. If you're watching this video in in a year from now or 10 years from now, the time frames will vary, okay? And so this is why we instituted an expedite fee process. So whether the person comes to our office or does it by mail or email, we charge extra fees to get it done more quickly. And I don't know if we should waste our time in this conversation today to say those fees, and explain it. But just to know that if someone needs it urgently, we can do it urgently, even in 2 to 3 business days, usually, if someone needs it, but there are extra fees to cover that. And the only reason we instituted those fees was it was the only way to make it fair. So that if, say, your form comes in on the 1st of May, someone else's form comes in on June 15th, why should your form that came in a month and a half earlier be done after this other person whose form came in 6 weeks later? Well, it shouldn't be. But if this person whose form came in 6 weeks later did pay what you could almost call a fee or a fine, almost like a tax, an extra value-added tax, to get their documents done more quickly, well, that was, in a sense, the reason why we offered this, because we did know that people needed it more quickly. And if they really needed it urgently, then we would charge that extra fee to do so. And it's not something that we want to do. It's just something that we've had to do to make it more fair, I guess you could say.
Okay, excellent. All right. Now this might seem like a silly question, but obviously it's on people's minds. Is the World Passport valid?
Well, what causes something to be valid is sort of my rhetorical question. You can answer it if you want to, Vibro. Man, why don't you?
Acceptance.
Very good. Okay. What else could make something valid?
Symbolism.
Right.
You're an attachment. Knowing what it means. Maybe trust. Trust would be something that makes it valid.
These are all great answers, and they're all right. They're all. I mean, not that there's going to be a wrong answer, but those are all fabulous answers, Vibro. Yeah. I mean, what makes the World Passport, like you said, people can trust it, or they should be able to trust it, that it represents them as who they are first and foremost. It has recognition. I mean, since 1954, the World Passport has been recognized by over 160 countries, by those governments placing visa, entry, excuse me, and exit stamps in the World Passport. So what they've done is, when people have traveled, either prior to their travel, which is what we encourage people to do, is go to the embassy or consulate, get that visa, and get it stamped in their passport by the consular officer, so that when they go to that country they will already have the stamp in it, and then when they're at the airport or at the border or wherever, the official will see, okay, you've already been given quote-unquote permission to be here, so there's no problem, come on in. And so over 160 countries have done that all around the world. And not only that, but there have been issued close to between 500 and 750,000 world passports since 1954, so there's a good number of individuals who recognize it. So not only is there, you could say, de facto recognition by individuals and de facto recognition by nation states, there's also actually de jure recognition. You could say official, de jure meaning official, or you could say maybe by law, but also official recognition. There are 6 countries that over the years have officially recognized the passport by sending us a letter from their head of state or foreign ministry confirming that they would recognize the passport, at least in most circumstances. But even an official country could reject someone if they think, you know, the person that might be trying to come is someone that they are, you know, afraid that they're going to harm somebody else or whatever else, you know, that would be a reason why they would stop that person.
That's pretty cool.
So yeah, so there's great recognition, and there is also there's de facto, there's de jure. There's also I don't know if I call it de jure, but there's by law recognition of the right to freedom of travel, which is the legal basis of the world passport. The world passport's basis comes from you could say the fact that, like I said, over 100 national constitutions affirm the right to travel, the UN Charter affirming fundamental human rights, the Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant, all these talk about the right to freedom of travel. And we would say separately from the codified or written down law, which is what those treaties that I just mentioned or declarations are, there is that innate and inalienable right that we have simply by being humans to exercise our right to freedom of travel or to claim that human right. So there's, you could say, in fact, recognition by individuals and governments, and by law recognition in the treaties and the official recognition by government. So is the passport valid? Well, certainly it's valid, but of course it's just as valid as you know it to be. Because if you don't think it's valid, well, for you maybe it's not. And I love when Gary Davis is crossing a border. He might come across an official who says to him, "Oh, hey, you know, Mr. Davis, we don't recognize that passport." And he'll say to them, "Yes, but I do." Yeah, exactly, I do.
Yeah.
So it proves that recognition is really more than just an individual claiming it. And an authority also comes from outside. So although we might say that it's valid and legitimate, and we could talk till we're blue in the face about its legitimacy, and I already have, but it's really whether another person or another entity, whatever that may be, whether you call it a government or whatever, is going to recognize it. And that's true for anything. You know, you talked about trust. If you know, people buy into the monetary system or they buy into the nation-state system because they've been either brainwashed to, or they like it because it gives them some kind of benefits or something. So they've bought into it. But all of that is, once again, they're just human constructs. So recognition and validity really depends upon whether we buy into it or not, whether it's actually a tool.
What we accept, yeah.
What we accept, and whether it's a tool that can help us. If it's a tool that can help us, well then that's great. If it's a tool that doesn't seem to help us, then either we try to use it in a different way, or we try to build a system around it, which is what this world citizen government actually is going to be, that will allow the document or the tool to function as it should. Because certainly in the nation-state system, your ability, and this, we never really got to this in your first question, Vibro, so I hope you don't mind me just taking another minute or two here. Sure. But your first question was some of the difficulties of using the world passport, and this would be a great time to talk about it when you're talking about validity. Because once again, if you're a person who's gone from one country to the next, you arrive in that next country, and the official at the border says, "Well, I haven't seen this passport. I don't think it's valid. I'm taking it from you. I'm charging you $50, and I'm sending you back to your country because now you have no document." And it's ridiculous because you did have a document, but the official took it away from you. So that has happened to people, of course, and people out there in the world need to know that although you have rights, although this is a world passport and you have the right to freedom of travel on your own planet, on a practical day-to-day basis, exercising that right makes you a human rights educator and a human rights activist. And I'm hoping that, and I won't go into it much now because there's a lot of other questions, Vibro, but we'll take another show, and maybe it won't be a whole show, but we'll talk about the how to use the passport, what I like to call the 10 Ps of passport usage. So
that's actually one of my next questions, so maybe we'll cover it.
Maybe we could get to it today, but it almost deserves its own show. But my point was that validity depends upon whether you accept no or yes by the official who you come across. If they say no to you and you simply accept it, well, you're not going to get very far, no matter what, because you're just accepting that what they said is valid and legitimate when it may be just an outright violation of your rights. So using the world passport, when you become a human rights activist or educator, not everybody's going to want to do that. and you need to know that ahead of time. So there may be other reasons why an individual would want to get the world passport, such as they like the ideology behind it, or they want to have it as a secondary backup document, and that's perfectly fine. So to use it as a primary document of identification and travel means that you need to know what your rights are. You need to be educated ahead of time. Otherwise, you're going to have frustrations and difficulties, certainly along the way.
This conversation reminds me of a video I recently saw of this, I think he was from Senegalese, or I don't know what African country, but he was coming into Britain, and he was using someone else's passport, and then he was all upset. He was all emotional. I'm just trying to get here. If my country is this and that, and what I'm hoping that people get away from this conversation, this chat, is that first of all, you want to stay within the framework of law.
Right.
You don't want to lie. You don't want to use someone else's document. You want to use your own document, your own identity, and stay legit, stay legal, because that guy, had he only known about the world passport, had he only educated himself, called David, talked to Bill, anyone at the WSA, and said, please let me know how to use this, he wouldn't have actually ended up getting detained. And that's what ended up happening in that video. He got detained. He was, I don't know if he was almost in tears or what. And,
sure.
And this is a very important point, because, it is your human right. You are sovereign, and you need to know how to exercise these properly, but do it legally. So that just listening to you talk reminded me of that video there.
Well, that's a great, it's a great important note to let people be aware that there's so many people out there who either for whatever reason are undocumented or can't get a national document, who like you said, may do something that they really shouldn't be doing, either using somebody else's document or using a different name or something like that. And that's certainly, we can't encourage that or condone that. Obviously, that's not right. But to get the world passport, when all it's claiming to be is a world passport, you're not lying. You're actually claiming the best status you can, and the most true status, which is, we're born a human, we die a human. Everything else in between is where someone tries to stamp you and classify you with what they think you are. Yeah. But I also want to make a comment, Vibro. I think it's crucial that people know that even with a world passport, even though it's valid and legal, there are governments that don't think it's valid or legal, and there are individuals who have been detained while using the world passport, just like the Senegalese fellow was detained while using either an illegitimate camouflage passport or whatever he was using. So it can happen, and that's why we have a legal department to back up people's rights while they're using it. So we can start letter writing campaigns, legal advocacy campaigns, writing a brief or whatever we might need to do to expose, like you said earlier, a violation of rights and to demand redress. But I have to say, because of the power and the brute force of the nation state, there are times where whatever we do on a legal level, because it's always on a legal level, everything we do is through, once again, I love to say, the power of the pen. Because it's on that level, peaceful level, it's not even necessarily sit-ins or whatever, or marches. We sometimes come across stumbling blocks. Officials who will put a wall in the way for that individual to get where she or he needs to go. And that's very frustrating. We could do whatever we can, and in the end, it may be that the nation state, in a sense, wins out against humanity, against human rights, and that's just the power, unfortunately, of the nation state in the situation we're in now, and that's why we do need that World Court of Human Rights that you and Gary Davis have talked about in a recent video.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we just need to be clear that there can be obstacles that are put in people's way, and you can't be shy, in a sense, or timid when you're using your world passport. You can be in your personal life, of course, but I mean, when you're using that passport, you are sort of sticking your neck out. You're putting yourself out there in the field of being a human rights activist while you're doing it.
Right. Well, we're coming up on the hour, and that is my next question. Maybe we can touch bases on it a little bit, and maybe we can cover it some other time. But how do I use the world passport, the 10 Ps of passport usage, passport to freedom, 4 or 5 possible refusals by airline, TSA, CBP,
Customs and Border Patrol,
Frontier,
right.
Guard, and local immigration?
Right. Well, yeah, I think. Well, I mean, we still have maybe about 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
But I'd rather not rush through all that. And that, like I said, that could be a whole other show in the next couple of weeks, Vibro. So
Sure.
why don't we just plan for that? If not next week, then the following week to do that show, and then that will be the next installment for people to look forward to.
That sounds good.
But just on a basic level, which we can start, and we'll take up again as a segue to the next show. But there could be a few other questions after this one that we might be able to get in the next 10 or 15 minutes. But
okay.
Is how to use the passport. Well, I mean, people don't know even how to necessarily use a national passport. And I don't know if I would have thought of this when I went through the 10 Ps, but it just came to me now, that we get calls from people saying, oh, I didn't know as an American I needed a visa to go to India. Well, you do. People in certain parts of the world, especially in the wealthiest countries, think they own the world, think, in an imperialistic way, they think they can, they run it, and they should be treated with the utmost care and utmost customer service or whatever else. Well, so an American with a U.S. passport, for example, might think that they can go where they want to, just present that blue passport, that U.S. passport with the eagle on it, and have the ticket to where they want to go. Well, that's not really the case anymore. And so there are many places where you do need a visa, and there's even places where you don't need a visa initially, but if you're going to stay there any more than 30 days, for example, you might actually do need to get the visa from the embassy or consulate of that country prior to your travel. So it's a question of, when the how-to question is a question of, once again, procedure, which is really what the focus of this show is. How do I do it, and how do I do it effectively? And so people need to know that whenever they're traveling, they need to be prepared, and that's one of the first P's of passport usage is the preparation. So whether it's the world passport, whether it's the national passport, you need to know what your rights are so that you can claim them. And so you already mentioned it briefly there a moment ago, but there's this book called Passport to Freedom, A Guide for World Citizens is the subtitle. It's a great book. It tells you about the language of the nation state and the language of the passport. It tells you how to deal with government officials, how to deal with bureaucrats who are standing in your way to get where you want to go. There's a great story about it, and I don't want to ruin it, but I would encourage people to read the first few pages of the book, My Country is the World, that Gary Davis's autobiography. Talks about how Gary deals with this young man who's come to his office who's frustrated because the system has put a roadblock in his way, and how you can effectively remove that roadblock on your own, because you're free. The sovereignty belongs with you, the individual. So it's a question of knowing what your rights are and knowing how to claim them. And so that book, both those books are really a good start. And once again, those can be, you can find those online, either at Amazon, or you can actually get them from WSA's website, worldservice.org, in our catalog section, and I encourage people to do so. Let me stop with that for now, Vibro, if you have some other questions that we can tackle in the last
yeah, sure.
10 minutes or so here.
Okay. Okay, you actually covered that. The question was, which countries honor the world passport? You actually went into that.
But whenever time you say a question, Vibro, something else comes to mind.
Sure.
I've learned this from Gary Davis over the years, that he's told me the same idea, that I'm a world citizen, I'm a human being on this planet. We're one human family. There's one world. There's one. We're all together. And he could say it 30 different ways, and each time he says it in a little bit different way, I almost learn about it in a new way, and I like that. It gives me a different viewpoint or perspective on it. I think that's great. And it's what's the word I'm looking for? It ingrains it in my brain, or it ingrains it in the system. So when you can learn about it in a different way, it's helpful. So
like the many shades of gray, yeah.
Right. Well, so the passport's where is it recognized? Even though I may have mentioned earlier, what I'd like to say at this point here, what came to mind is that when someone's calling me on the phone, I will tell them, look, the passport is best recognized in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America and the Caribbean, in Eastern Europe, and in the Middle East. So those regions of the world is where it's best recognized. I'm not saying it's always recognized there, because it may not be, but that's where it has been over the years, in the last almost 60 years of this organization. That's where it's been best recognized. Where it's the most difficult to use is in North America and Western Europe. So what does that mean? Well, okay, and why? Well, North America and Western Europe, that's the wealthiest countries, U.S. and Canada, France, Germany, England, Switzerland, Belgium, Netherlands, Spain, etc. These countries are the wealthiest countries, and they want to limit immigration. Especially, they only want to really limit to wealthy people. People who have a lot of money.
Anti-human rights.
Well, Sure, of course. That's what it comes down to. It's economic discrimination mostly, but it is anti-human rights. But it's because they want to keep what they have to themselves, and they really only want people who are going to spend money in their community to come, and that's it. If you're poor or starving or a refugee or whatever else, they're afraid that you might come and stay to get a better life or to get a better job. And why shouldn't you? It's your own planet too. You should be able to. We'll get into the hows of that maybe later on. But anyway, so. Why those governments? Well, that's the main thing. Like you said, it's outright either human rights violation or discrimination. And so getting a visa to go to one of those countries is very, very difficult, if not impossible, almost. I mean, there's times when if you can get on a plane and cry, I need asylum right when you arrive, well, then you might actually be successful, because the government does have to review your case to see if you have like a credible fear interview to see if you really do have a well-founded fear of persecution if you claim that right when you arrive. And of course there's a lot of people who are turned back because they don't think they have a credible fear. But if you are convincing that you do, and you really do have a persecution based on your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion against the government, or your social group, those are the 5 main reasons for asylum, then you might be able to stay. So once again, if it weren't for that, if you're just a tourist and you live in a poor country and you want to come to United Kingdom, for example, or Canada or US or something, your ability to get there already, whether it's the world passport or the national passport, is very limited because you're coming from a poorer place in the world, less developed or whatever. And once again, governments don't want humans traveling. They want national subjects who they can control. And if you're traveling as a human, which is what you do, or sovereign when you're traveling with the world passport, you're outside of their system or their jurisdiction, perhaps, and they don't like that. They want to control. They want you within their framework, and you're outside of it when you're doing that. So it's a challenge already, just by the fact that you're carrying something different that they may not be used to seeing.
Or as a HB1 visa holder, so you can come work for them and make them money and study and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. Sure. Well, I mean, governments. It makes sense within the nation-state system why a government would want to control its immigration. Why would want to present certain people and allow others. I mean, it makes sense if you're a nation-state, of course. But I would say that with regard to human rights, it does. Obviously, universal rights. It doesn't matter where you are in the universe. You have rights, and they should be respected. And one of those is the right to freedom of travel. Anyway, traveling with the world passport, we always encourage and want people to think about the idea of getting a visa prior to travel. It's very helpful because then when you have it, it makes it easier along the way. But let me put it this way, even having to get a visa really, in a sense, is a violation of your right to travel. Why should you even have to get a visa? Why can't you just up and go? And a lot of people think that, and although they're right to think that, and it's a realistic hope, it is certainly an unrealistic expectation, because a person might have that hope to be able to do that, but on a realistic level, will they be able to with only presenting the world passport or even with their own national passport? Once again, it's not so much a question of what passport you're carrying, it's a question of where you were born and how much money you have in your bank account or in your pocket. All these things are going to affect how a border official or an embassy official treats you. And so just because there's certain things that you might not have in your life because you've been less privileged than others, does that mean you shouldn't be able to go where you want to and travel and see beautiful, exquisite parts of planet Earth or learn from other people? I don't think it should mean that.
Absolutely. All right, so we're coming up on the hour, actually getting really close to going over, so I'll ask you one last question,
Sure.
And then we'll wrap up here. And I'd like to finish off with a quote also.
Sure.
Let's see. The last question is, if I'm living in the United States, can I use the world passport? You kind of touched on that, but if you don't mind elaborating.
Sure. And of course, what I say I would not rely upon. You're going to have to do your own research and do your own study and actually try it to see how it effectively will.
Experimentation, yeah.
Experimentation, exactly. Whether it be effective for you or not. And sometimes, like I said, it's presentation, it's appearance, how we present ourselves that can effectively make the use of your world passport either very easy or very difficult. So if you know you're right and you know that you have the right to travel or the right to ID yourself as a person before the law, well then that's a good way already to know that when you carry this passport, if someone rejects it, then you have the right to question them and to challenge their rejection, because the rejection, unless you're harming somebody, as I said, is illegitimate. You have the right to go live and work where you want to on your own planet, according to fundamental human rights. Maybe not according to national law, but that's a whole other topic, which once again we can get to in a different show. So using it in the United States, I guess back to your question, It depends. People have used their world passports just locally to enter an office building where you have to present identification, because so many office buildings in big cities now require you to ID yourself because of their fear, obviously, of what's been going on in the last 10 years in the world. So just for that, some people have used it. Gary Davis and I once, we went to the U.S. Department of Justice once, each carrying our world passport, and that was the only thing we used to identify ourselves to get into the building. It was kind of funny. It was a fun experience. But anyway, besides identification, people have traveled within the United States with only their world passport. Gary Davis travels around the United States. He goes out to California to visit the film producers working on a film on his life pretty frequently to Southern California. And he's used it. That's all that he has. Now, certainly, we are not discouraging people from either getting a national passport or carrying a driver's license or whatever other document that they might have that will ease their life. I mean, people come to World Service Authority because sometimes we're a quick fix or we're the only solution to their problem. And so, and for those people, this might be the only thing or the ideal thing to get. But on a practical level and on a principle level, there are two different things. And so when I talk to people about this, I say, look, if in principle you only want to carry this, and this is it, and you want to remove yourself from the whole nation-state system and regime and all of that, well, you're going to need to know that that can make your life extremely difficult and it's not necessary. Gary Davis says, look, I renounced my citizenship so that no one else would ever have to do that again, as long as we raise our allegiance to that higher level and claim that higher level world citizenship. Then you don't have to give up the lower level allegiance if you don't want to. And so on a principled level, there are people who only want to have a world passport, and there are some people in the world who that's it, that's all they carry, and then they try to make it work. There's a seafarer, a guy who owns a boat, who is on our Yahoo group, and oftentimes is participating in the conversation, and he finds his world passport to be very effective in docking at various ports and other things that he needs. And so on a principle level, I would say, by all means, if that's all you want to get, great, get the world passport, but know that you're going to have probably more difficulties than if you had other documents that you could show to quote-unquote prove who you are to that suspecting government official who might want to challenge you. So once again, on a practical level, then rather than principle, if you want to have a U.S. passport and a world passport, or a national passport and a world passport, or the national driver's license or state driver's license and also a world passport, then by all means do so. But do note, though, now that I brought it up, I have to follow through with that thought. The world passport is not a driver's license, and no one should be using it as a driver's permit or license. Although it affirms the right to travel, it doesn't mean that you know how to operate a vehicle of any kind. So you cannot use it as that purpose, and I encourage people to understand that ahead of time. So using the U.S. certainly, I would say, lately has become a little bit more difficult from what passport holders tell us, just because doing anything in the nation-state system has become a little bit more difficult because of the control systems that are going on all over the world, not just here but everywhere, to make sure that people are acting in the way that the government wants them to. I mean, in a sense, it's sort of like a big brother watching you kind of thing, where we're being forced into like lines and to be sheep and say yes sir, yes ma'am, to any official who's wearing any kind of badge.
Yeah, and starting to play a squeeze, that's for sure.
Yeah, we are being squeezed. Our rights are being squeezed. Some rights are being maybe thrown out the window, perhaps. Well, but getting your rights respected, whether it's using your world passport or just generally, has become harder, I would say, in the last decade or so.
Very nice. Okay, so well, I'd like to take the time to thank you once again for making the time to chat with us and answer all these questions. These are very important questions, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime soon, time allowing. All right, so the quote's going to come from Tom Paine from The Rights of Men, and it quotes, "It has been thought a considerable advance towards establishing the principle of freedom to say that government is a compact between those who govern and those who are governed. But this cannot be true, because it is putting the effect before the cause. For as men and women must have existed before governments existed, there once was a time when governments did not exist, and consequently there could originally exist no governors to form such a compact with. The fact, therefore, must be that the individuals themselves, each in his or her own personal sovereign right, entered into a compact with each other to produce a government." And that's exactly what I urge everyone listening and anyone that I come in contact with is to come into a global compact known as World Citizenship. Anyone have any questions, please chime in. Any concerns, let us know. Thanks for hanging out. Take
Thanks
care.
very much, Vibro. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Not a problem. Glad to be with you.